I moved into the neighborhood thinking it was going to be the perfect place to start over, to finally have some peace after years of working grueling hours and saving every penny for a house I could actually call mine. The community was picturesque, almost unnervingly so, manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, the faint hum of sprinklers that seemed to go off in perfect synchronization every morning at 6 a.m. I should have known it wasn't just a neighborhood, it was an HOA kingdom, and the so-called queen of it all was Karen, the woman who had been running the homeowners association for the last decade like it was her personal empire. She was tall, always in pastel-colored tracksuits, wore massive sunglasses that made her look like she was constantly judging everyone, and she never missed an opportunity to remind people that she set the rules. I had heard stories about her from the previous owner of my house before I signed the papers, but I had shrugged them off, thinking I could keep my head down and avoid trouble. I was wrong. For the first 2 weeks, everything was fine. I kept to myself, unpacked my boxes, set up my garage the way I liked it, and parked my pride and joy, my black Chevy Silverado, in the assigned parking spot right outside my house. I had worked on that truck for years, customizing it, tuning it, making it something that truly reflected who I was. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was a symbol of everything I had built for myself. But then, on the morning of the 15th day, I walked outside to leave for work and found a white Porsche 911 sitting in my spot. At first, I thought maybe it was some sort of emergency or maybe a visitor had made a mistake, so I parked a little farther down the street and left a polite note under the wiper asking them not to park there again because that spot was assigned to my house. The next morning, the Porsche was there again. And again the morning after that. By the 4th day, I was getting irritated. It wasn't just about the inconvenience, it was about respect. This was my property, and I had every right to park in front of my house. So, I went to the HOA office, a small building near the clubhouse, and filed a formal complaint. That's when I met Karen for the first time in person. She sat behind the desk like she owned the entire zip code, her lips pressed into a tight line as she listened to me. "Oh, that's just my son," she said casually, waving her hand as if that explained everything. "He's visiting from college, and he likes to park there because it's closer to our house than our driveway. Don't worry, it's temporary." I kept my cool, even though I could feel my blood pressure rising. "With all due respect, ma'am, it's not temporary if it's been happening every morning for 4 days straight. That spot is mine. I have the right to park there." She gave me a thin smile, the kind that wasn't really a smile at all. "Well, technically, it's common property owned by the HOA. We just assign spots for convenience. If my son is parked there, it's not a violation. Consider it part of being a good neighbor." Being a good neighbor. That phrase stuck in my head like a splinter. Apparently, in Karen's world, being a good neighbor meant letting her and her family do whatever they wanted. I walked out of that office knowing this wasn't the last time I was going to have a run-in with her. The next week turned into a battle of wills. I tried everything short of direct confrontation to get her son to stop parking there. I left more notes. I politely knocked on their door one evening and asked if they could have him park somewhere else, and I even called the HOA emergency line when I came home late one night to find the Porsche taking up not just my spot but half the curb space too. Every time, Karen brushed me off with some excuse about how he was just going to be here for a few days, or it was too late to move it now, he'd do it tomorrow. But tomorrow never came. By the second week of this nonsense, I started noticing little things. My trash cans would mysteriously be knocked over on collection day. A small scratch appeared on the side of my truck, nothing deep, but enough to make me furious. I couldn't prove it was them, but I knew in my gut it was related. Karen's son, whose name I later found out was Tyler, had this smug look every time I saw him. He was the kind of kid who probably never heard the word no in his life. Designer clothes, perfect hair, always walking around with his phone glued to his hand and earbuds in. He knew exactly what he was doing. Then came the morning that really lit the fuse. I had an important meeting at work and was already running late. When I stepped outside, not only was Tyler's Porsche in my spot again, but this time it was parked at an angle, as if to block me from parking anywhere near my own house. Something in me snapped. I grabbed my phone, took pictures from every angle, and sent them to the HOA email with a very direct message: if this car is not moved within 24 hours, I will have it towed at the owner's expense. 2 hours later, I got a call from Karen herself. She didn't sound apologetic, she sounded angry. "You had no right to threaten my son like that," she hissed over the phone. "You need to remember that this is a community, and we expect our members to cooperate and be flexible. If you start making trouble, I can guarantee you won't like the consequences." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about a parking spot anymore. This was about power. Karen thought she could intimidate me into backing down, just like she had probably done with a dozen other neighbors before me. But I wasn't built that way. I had worked too hard, gone through too much in life to let someone like her push me around. That night, I sat in my garage staring at my truck, thinking about what to do next. I wasn't going to let this go. If Karen and her son wanted a war over a parking spot, then a war was exactly what they were going to get. That night I barely slept, my mind spinning with every possible way to deal with this problem. The next morning, sure enough, the Porsche was there again, sitting in my spot like a smug white monument to entitlement. But this time, instead of just getting mad, I decided to get smart. I parked my truck directly behind it, blocking it in completely. I wasn't technically violating any rules, I was still parked in front of my house, and the street had enough space for cars to pass. I grabbed a folding chair, a cup of coffee, and sat in my driveway just waiting. About an hour later, Tyler came out of the house, dressed in some ridiculously expensive-looking athletic gear, probably heading to the gym. The moment he saw my truck blocking him in, he stopped in his tracks. I could see the irritation on his face, which instantly made my day a little bit better. He walked over and tapped on my window. "Hey, man, can you move your truck?" "I gotta get out," he said with that casual arrogance only rich kids seem to have. I rolled my window down slowly and gave him a smile. "Oh, no problem. Just as soon as you stop parking in my spot." He blinked, clearly not expecting me to say that. "It's just a parking spot. Chill out." "Then it shouldn't be a big deal for you to park somewhere else," I shot back. He stared at me for a second, then scoffed and walked away, muttering something under his breath. He went back inside, and I didn't see him again for the rest of the day. That evening, when I came home from work, the Porsche was gone. I thought maybe I had finally gotten through to him, until the next morning, when I woke up to find it parked there again, only this time it had a brand new passive-aggressive twist. Tyler had parked so close to the curb that I could barely squeeze past to get into my own truck. It was obvious at this point that this was no longer just an inconvenience for him, it was a game. And if he wanted to play games, I was more than ready. I went online that night and started reading the HOA bylaws line by line. It was dry, boring, legal language, but somewhere in the middle of page 37, I found what I was looking for, a clause about persistent misuse of common property and how, in such cases, the HOA had the authority to fine or even tow the offending vehicle after proper notice. I printed that page, highlighted the section, and stuck it in an envelope addressed to Karen. 2 days later, I got a letter back, not an apology, not even a neutral response. No, Karen had doubled down. She wrote that my behavior was hostile, and that I was creating a hostile environment for her family. She even hinted that if I continued to harass her son, she would bring me up for a disciplinary hearing with the HOA board. I laughed out loud when I read it. A disciplinary hearing? Over asking someone not to park in my assigned spot? That weekend, I decided I was done playing nice. If Karen wanted to use the HOA to intimidate me, I was going to use every legal and creative way possible to push back. I installed a small security camera pointed directly at the parking spot and connected it to my phone. Every time the Porsche showed up, I took time-stamped footage and uploaded it to a separate folder labeled Evidence. Then I printed a massive sign and stuck it in the ground near the spot that read, "Private parking, trespassers will be towed." It wasn't technically against the rules, since the HOA had no restriction on temporary signage. Tyler saw the sign the next morning when he came out, and I could tell it annoyed him. He revved the Porsche's engine louder than usual before pulling out, like a kid throwing a tantrum. But what happened next told me this was far from over. That evening, when I came home from work, my sign was gone. Not blown away, gone. Someone had taken it. And I didn't need to be Sherlock Holmes to figure out who. I went straight to my garage, checked the camera footage, and sure enough, there he was in broad daylight, smirking as he yanked the sign out of the ground and tossed it into the back of his Porsche before driving off. That was it. That was the moment I decided this had gone far enough. The next day, I called a towing company and explained the situation. They told me as long as I could prove it was my spot and I had given written notice, they could tow it at the owner's expense. I couldn't wait. I parked my truck down the street that night, just far enough that Tyler wouldn't see me. The next morning, I watched from my living room window as he casually pulled up and parked like he always did. 30 minutes later, the tow truck arrived. Watching that Porsche get hooked up and lifted onto the flatbed was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. I swear I could have framed the sight like a piece of art. When Tyler came running out, screaming and waving his arms, it was even better. He shouted at the tow truck driver, at me, at anyone who would listen, but it didn't matter, the driver had the paperwork, and the car was gone. I thought maybe that would finally end it, but I underestimated just how far Karen was willing to go. That evening, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Karen was standing there, angrier than I had ever seen her. Her face was red, and she had Tyler standing right behind her, arms crossed. "You had no right to tow my son's car," she snapped. I held up the folder of printed evidence, photos, videos, highlighted bylaws. Actually, I had every right. And if you try to retaliate, I'll take this straight to the county. Her eyes narrowed. "You think you can threaten me? You have no idea who you're dealing with." And then she walked away, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding. I knew right then this wasn't over. This wasn't just a neighborly disagreement anymore, this was a full-blown war, and Karen had just declared it. The next few days felt strangely quiet, almost too quiet. I kept waiting for the next move, for the retaliation I knew was coming. I had learned enough about Karen by now to know she wasn't the type to just let something like this slide. Sure enough, it started small, almost like little warning shots. My mailbox was left open one morning after the mail had been delivered, and several of my envelopes were soaked from the sprinklers. 2 days later, my garbage can mysteriously didn't get emptied while everyone else's on the street did. I called the waste management company, and they said my can hadn't been out at the curb, but I knew for a fact I had dragged it out the night before. Someone had to have moved it back after I'd gone to bed. Then the letters started showing up. Not official HOA letters, not even signed, just anonymous notes left on my porch in childish handwriting. Things like, "Go back where you came from," and, "This neighborhood doesn't want you here." It was ridiculous, juvenile stuff, but I knew exactly where it was coming from. And every time I saw Tyler's Porsche drive by, shiny and perfect again after he'd paid to get it out of the impound lot, he'd slow down just enough to smirk at me. One night I caught him and two of his friends standing near my driveway, laughing. When I stepped outside, they scattered like cockroaches, but when I walked down to check, I found that they had dumped an entire bag of fast food trash under my truck, greasy wrappers, half-empty soda cups, the works. That was it. I filed another complaint with the HOA, this time including printed pictures from my security camera footage. A week later, I was summoned to an HOA board meeting, not to discuss my complaints, but to defend myself. Karen had called for a special disciplinary hearing against me, claiming I was creating tension in the community and engaging in hostile acts against her son. I sat there at the end of a long table while Karen and three of her HOA cronies tried to lecture me about being a good neighbor. "Your behavior has been disruptive," Karen said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "We understand you're new to the neighborhood, but threatening to tow vehicles and putting up aggressive signage is not the way we do things here." I waited until she was finished, then calmly slid my folder across the table. "Here's every piece of evidence I've collected for the last month," I said evenly. "Video footage of your son parking illegally. Photographs of him trespassing on my property. Documentation of every complaint I've filed that your office ignored. If you want to play this game, I'm ready to take this entire file straight to the county HOA oversight board and to my attorney." For a moment, the room went completely silent. Karen's face turned pale, and I could see the board members glancing at each other nervously. They knew I wasn't bluffing. After a tense pause, one of them cleared his throat and said, "Perhaps we can find a compromise." That compromise turned out to be nothing more than a weak verbal agreement that Tyler would park in their own driveway from now on. I walked out of that meeting feeling like I'd finally won. But as I learned very quickly, Karen didn't like losing, not even a little bit. 2 nights later, I woke up to the sound of something hitting my garage door. When I ran outside, I found a long scratch running across the side of my truck, deep enough to cut through the paint. I checked the camera footage and caught a blurry figure running off, wearing a hoodie and shorts. I couldn't prove it was Tyler, the footage wasn't clear enough, but I knew. I just knew. That was when I stopped playing defense and went fully on offense. I started documenting everything, every interaction, every suspicious incident, every petty act of vandalism. I also started talking to my neighbors, quietly, carefully, asking if they had ever had problems with Karen or her son. To my surprise, several of them opened up. One guy told me Karen had fined him $200 for leaving his holiday lights up too long after New Year's. Another said she had threatened to report him for having unauthorized landscaping because he planted flowers she didn't approve of. Slowly, I realized that Karen had been terrorizing this neighborhood for years, using her position on the HOA board to bully and intimidate people. So I did something that shocked even myself. I started organizing. I put together a group chat with the neighbors who were willing to talk and began gathering signatures for a petition to remove Karen as HOA president. It wasn't easy, a lot of people were scared of retaliation, but one by one, they started signing. They were tired of her too. They were tired of being told what color their blinds could be, how short their grass had to stay, and where they could park their cars. Tyler must have sensed something was happening, because his behavior got worse. One afternoon I caught him sitting on the hood of his Porsche right in front of my house, drinking a soda and staring at my security camera with a grin on his face. He was daring me to do something. That night, someone egged my house. Not just 1 or 2 eggs, a dozen. I found yolk dripping from my windows, my door, even my truck. I filed a police report. I gave them the footage I had, even though it wasn't clear enough for a positive ID. The officer who came out was sympathetic but honest. If you can catch them in the act, we can do something. Until then, it's just vandalism we can't pin on anyone. That was when I came up with my plan, the plan that would end this whole thing once and for all. I upgraded my security system with motion-activated floodlights, extra cameras, and a loud siren alarm that would go off if anyone stepped on my driveway after midnight. I also parked my truck in the driveway that night, just waiting. Around 2 a.m., the alarm went off. I ran to the window in time to see Tyler and his two friends running away, laughing, but this time, the cameras caught everything. Clear, high-definition video of Tyler tossing something at my garage door and then sprinting away. I called the police right then and there, and they came out within minutes. When I showed them the footage, the officer's face changed from tired to serious. "That's enough," he said. "We can charge them with criminal mischief for this." By sunrise, Tyler was sitting in the back of a police cruiser, and Karen was standing in my driveway screaming at the top of her lungs about how I had ruined her son's future. But I didn't feel bad, not even a little. Because for the first time since this all started, it felt like the playing field was finally level. Karen's screaming that morning was so loud that half the neighborhood came outside to see what was happening. She was standing in the middle of the street, hair a mess, housecoat flapping, yelling at the cops, yelling at me, yelling at anyone who dared to look her way. "You can't do this. He's just a kid. You're destroying his life over a parking spot," she shrieked. But the officers didn't care, the video was clear, and the damage to my property was undeniable. They cited Tyler on the spot, wrote him up, and told Karen she could contest it in court if she wanted to. When the police car finally drove away with Tyler in the back seat, Karen turned to me with pure venom in her eyes. "You're going to regret this," she hissed. "I will make sure you never have a moment's peace in this neighborhood." But what she didn't realize was that I was already 10 steps ahead. The petition I'd started was nearly full by that point. I had signatures from over 2/3 of the homeowners, which was enough to call for a special election to remove her from the HOA board entirely. The timing couldn't have been better. I sent out an email blast that same afternoon with the subject line, "It's time for change." Attached was not just the petition, but also a copy of the police report and a still frame from the video of Tyler vandalizing my property. The response was overwhelming. People who had been too afraid to speak up before started coming to me privately, telling me their stories about Karen, the fines, the threats, the harassment. One neighbor, an elderly man named Mr. Thompson, told me Karen had once threatened to have his car towed because it had too much dirt on the tires after he came back from a camping trip. Another neighbor, a young mom, said Karen had called CPS on her because her kids left sidewalk chalk drawings on the driveway. Hearing all of this only strengthened my resolve. The day of the HOA special meeting was something I will never forget. The clubhouse was packed, standing room only. Karen walked in like she still owned the place, her chin high, her lips pursed, but I could tell she was rattled. The petition had forced her hand, she had to face the board and the entire community. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I stood up in front of everyone, took a deep breath, and laid out the facts. I explained the parking dispute, the vandalism, the harassment, the threats. I passed around printed copies of the video evidence and the police report. I didn't raise my voice, didn't get emotional, I just let the truth speak for itself. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then, one by one, people started to clap. It started slow, hesitant, but it grew until half the room was applauding. Karen's face turned beet red. She tried to defend herself, tried to claim I was lying, that this was all a smear campaign, but nobody was buying it anymore. Too many people had their own stories, their own grudges, their own reasons for wanting her gone. When the board finally called the vote, the result was nearly unanimous. Karen was removed as HOA president effective immediately. I could see the shock on her face. She had ruled this neighborhood for over a decade, and now it was all slipping through her fingers. But I wasn't done yet. After the meeting, I approached the board with a proposal: stricter enforcement of parking rules, a transparent complaint process, and term limits for board members so no one person could hold power for too long. To my surprise, they agreed. They even asked me if I would consider running for the open president position. I hadn't planned on it, but the thought of making sure nobody else ever had to deal with what I went through was too good to pass up. I spent the next few weeks campaigning quietly, talking to neighbors, listening to their concerns, promising to bring fairness and balance back to the HOA. The election was more symbolic than anything. Karen had left such a bad taste in everyone's mouth that I won by a landslide. Becoming HOA president changed everything. Suddenly, I had the power to fix the problems that had plagued this community for years. The first thing I did was officially assign parking spots and issue parking permits so there would never again be confusion or disputes about who could park where. The second thing I did was waive several unfair fines that Karen had handed out, giving people back hundreds of dollars she had taken from them over the years. Of course, Karen didn't take any of this lying down. She still lived in the neighborhood, after all. For a while, she tried to stir up trouble, whisper campaigns, nasty posts on the neighborhood Facebook group, but nobody was listening anymore. Tyler, for his part, kept his head down after his court date. I heard through the grapevine that he had to pay restitution for the damage to my truck and attend community service. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The best part came about a month later, when I was sitting on my porch one evening and a group of neighbors stopped by just to say thank you. "You changed this place," one of them told me. "We were all too scared to stand up to her, but you did. You made it better for everyone." That meant more to me than any title or vote ever could. For the first time since I moved there, the neighborhood actually felt like a community, one where people looked out for each other instead of living in fear of one woman's rules. And every time I parked my truck in my perfectly assigned spot, I smiled a little to myself, knowing that I hadn't just fought for that piece of asphalt, I'd fought for my right to live in peace. Life settled into a rhythm after the election, and for the first time since I'd moved into the neighborhood, I actually enjoyed coming home at the end of the day. The hostility was gone. People waved when they saw me, kids rode their bikes in the street without fear of being yelled at, and there was this quiet sense of relief that seemed to hang over everyone. But just because Karen was out of power didn't mean she was out of my life completely. I'd still see her occasionally, walking her little white dog or checking her mailbox. Every time, she would look at me with that same mixture of anger and disbelief, like she still couldn't comprehend that she had lost. For weeks, I ignored her. I had bigger things to focus on. We were drafting a new set of HOA bylaws, putting in safeguards to make sure no one person could ever abuse the system the way she had. Then one evening, just as the sun was setting, Karen showed up on my porch. I didn't expect it. She looked tired, her face lined with stress, her hair not as perfectly styled as it used to be. For a long moment, she just stood there, clutching her dog's leash, and then she said, "I want to talk." I stepped aside and let her in, though I stayed cautious. We sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time, she didn't look like the queen of the neighborhood. She looked like a woman who had finally been forced to face herself. "I was wrong," she said quietly. "About a lot of things. About you, about how I ran this place. I liked being in control. It made me feel important. I didn't say anything right away. I just let her talk. She told me about how she'd felt invisible before becoming HOA president, how running the board gave her purpose. And somewhere along the line, she had started confusing control with respect. I thought if everyone followed my rules, it meant they liked me. That they respected me, she admitted. But all I did was make everyone hate me. I could tell it wasn't easy for her to say all this, and maybe a part of me respected that she was finally trying. But I also wasn't about to forget the months of hell she and her son had put me through. Karen, I said finally, I don't hate you. I just wanted to live here in peace. That's all I ever wanted. She nodded slowly, stood up, and left without another word. That was the last time we ever spoke face to face. Tyler, on the other hand, stayed quiet for a while but eventually started acting out again. Not toward me, I think he knew better by then, but around the neighborhood. He was caught speeding down the main road one afternoon, nearly hitting a kid on a bike, and I had no choice but to send him a formal notice under the new HOA safety rules. Karen didn't fight it. She just paid the fine quietly and kept her head down. Months passed, and the neighborhood transformed completely. We started hosting block parties, barbecues, and holiday events. People actually laughed together instead of whispering behind each other's backs. And slowly, the memory of the parking wars faded into just another neighborhood story, one people told with a grin when they wanted to warn newcomers about what happens when you mess with the wrong guy. But the real moment of closure came one Saturday morning when I heard a strange noise outside. I opened my front door and saw Tyler standing there, holding a bucket of soapy water and a sponge. "I came to wash your truck," he said, almost sheepishly. I raised an eyebrow. "Why?" He shrugged, not quite meeting my eyes. "Mom says I should make things right." "Anne." "I guess she's right." I was a jerk. It wasn't much, but it was something. I let him do it, stood there watching as he scrubbed the sides and carefully rinsed it down. When he was done, he actually looked at me for the first time without that smug grin. "It's a nice truck," he said. "Yeah," I replied. "It is." After that day, something shifted. Tyler wasn't friendly exactly, but he wasn't hostile anymore either. We had reached an understanding, an unspoken truce. Years from now, I know people will still talk about the time I had the HOA president's son's Porsche towed and then got her removed from power. Some will probably exaggerate the story, turn it into a legend of sorts. But I don't mind. Because to me, it's not just about winning, it's about proving that no one has the right to bully their neighbors, no matter how much power they think they have. Every evening now, when I park my truck in my perfectly assigned spot, I take a moment to breathe it all in, the quiet, the peace, the knowledge that I fought for this. Not just for me, but for everyone who lives here. And as the sun sets and the neighborhood lights come on one by one, I know that I turned something broken into something worth fighting for. And that, in the end, is the sweetest revenge of all.